Hey everybody, Jekyll's Painting here with another tutorial. Got an airbrush quickie today, and we're going to be working on some ogre flesh for these ninja man-eaters. I picked these guys up for a new Age of Sigmar army as a mercenary company. So I've got 3 of these guys, converted up a little bit, did some green stuff, did some plastic art, used some bits to give me 3 individual ogre ninjas, and they're being led by a fire belly, and we need to paint their flesh. So I'm going to knock that out real quick. I'm going to start off with some Ebony Flesh Primer from Stynylrez. This is a great kind of dark brown primer, and I'm just going to lightly prime these resin models in a couple of coats. I like to focus on one area and then move around the model doing light coats of primer and then let that dry so then I can do a second or possibly third pass, so that way the primer has a really nice bond to the resin. It's important when you're working with resin and metal models that you take it slow and steady with the primer. Probably 2 or 3 light coats or passes across the model. You don't want it building up too wet in any one area, because the primer may not get a good bond on that resin or metal and it may not get into the details. And you definitely don't want bright white resin showing through your paint job. Doesn't look very pretty. Okay, now that we've got all of our man-eaters primed up, I'm going to pull out this new paint from Citadel. I believe this was a Forge World airbrush paint that Citadel recently brought over into their main line. This is Night Questor Flesh. It's going to be a good kind of dark flesh tone to start out, and I'm going to lightly spray that on the model kind of at all angles, but I'm not doing a 100% opaque coat. I'm just going over the whole model, leaving some of that darker brown ebony flesh showing through in the deepest recesses of detail, like his scars and muscles and the sides of his big fat gut, that kind of thing, so we have a little bit of a gradient forming. And again, with these flesh tones, they can be a little finicky because you're thinning them down with Flow Improver, and most flesh tones are kind of thin paints to begin with. Thin as in thin with pigment density. So when you thin that out with Flow Improver, it's a lot easier to puddle those paints with the airbrush and then spiderweb them out. So take your time, be careful, don't rush the flesh tone. We want these nice, smooth, soft flesh tones on our models because that's the predominant feature on these guys. After that paint is dried up, I'm going to pull out some Pro Acryl Golden Brown, and we're going to be mixing this about 50-50 into our Night Questor Flesh to get sort of an Asian skin tone. I see these ninja ogres, and ogres are known for their big bellies, and I get kind of that sumo wrestler vibe from these guys, you know, so I want to kind of bring that type of skin tone into these ogres. And traditionally the ogres in Warhammer Fantasy or Age of Sigmar do have that sort of darker golden type skin tone, and so I want to reflect that on these guys instead of just doing sort of, you know, your boring old flesh workup that we've seen a million times. I'm using the airbrush here to focus on the biggest areas of detail, like his big slabs of muscle, his big belly, knuckles on the hands, his toes, things like that. And I'm just taking my time being really light with the airbrush so that I don't blast out the previous colors. I want that darker skin tone in the recesses, in the shadows, so we have a nice soft transition, bringing out those details. After that step, I'm going to put a little bit of ivory into that mix with the golden brown. So now we have primarily golden brown with just a very teeny tiny amount of ivory to brighten it out. And again, I'm going to go in with the airbrush and focus even more on the predominant details. So I'm going to pick out his pectorals, the tops of his big belly, the muscles on his arms and across the tops of his hands, things like that, to really pop those details out. And it's gonna look a little bright because we're gonna wash it down. So I'm taking that color a little brighter than I want the final product to be, so that when I put the dark wash all over the model, we put that dark color filter on there and it darkens it back down to where we need it to be. The next step is going to be a varnish. I'm pulling out my matte varnish from Vallejo, and we're going to thin that out with some airbrush thinner and get a nice varnish coat over all of our models. This is just to protect our paint and make sure that when we put the wash on there, we don't scrub off or scrape or wash or reactivate any of that previous airbrush paint, because with flesh tones it can be fairly fragile after airbrushing it on there. So I'm going to varnish these guys and then just let them sit for about 20 to 30 minutes while I go grab lunch, so that way I'm not sitting around twiddling my thumbs. Alright, we're back after our 30-minute break and our varnish is nice and dry. I've got my washes here, a little bit of red tone, a little bit of strong tone, and some brown wash. It's basically strong tone, just brown wash. I'm going to mix all three of those in equal parts to create a flesh wash, and then add a little bit of water, a little bit of flow improver, stir that up nice to get a light skin tone wash for these guys. It's not going to overpower our nice golden brown skin. Lightly put that all over the model, making sure to get it into all the details. If there's any puddles that start forming on your big flat areas that you want to stay clean, just get a little bit of water in your airbrush and move that wash around, help it get where it needs to go. And this is what it looks like when he's dry. We've got all those details popping out, but his muscles are a little bit dirty and dingy, so I'm going to take a little bit of golden brown. I think I used like 2 drops, and heavily dilute that with some flow improver. You can see as I spray that on my paper here, it's basically transparent. And we're going to lightly spray that transparent coat over the model, making sure not to blast out any of our color. We just want a little bit of this golden brown to tint back over our flesh tones to create a nice soft transition. Hope you guys enjoyed this airbrush quickie. I'm going to be finishing these models live on Twitch, so make sure to check out that Twitch link below in the video so you can see me paint them up. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you next time.